Right now, the Nassau County executive race, a tough rematch tonight. We'll be joined by the man who's fighting to get his old job back. And next, President Obama's approval ratings, well, they've sunk to a new low. What is to blame, and how can D.C. restore the public's faith in government? And trust me, when you see these numbers, you'll see just how shaken it is. And later, will Michael Skakel be released from prison while he awaits a new trial in the 1975 murder of his neighbor? We're joined by a legal expert who'll break down what's going on in this high-profile case. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thanks so much for joining us this Thursday evening, October 31st. And we start tonight, actually, with some breaking news and a story we've covered for so many programs here, and that is stop and frisk. Well, federal appeals court has blocked the judge's order requiring changes to the NYPD stop and frisk program and has removed the judge from the case. Now, the court says the decisions of Judge Shira Scheindlin will be stayed pending the outcome of an appeal by the city. Judge Scheindlin had ruled in August, as many of you know, that the city violated the Constitution the way that it carried out its stop and frisk program. The city appealed her findings, including a decision to assign a monitor to help the police department change its policy as well as training program. Appeals court said judge needed to be removed from the case because she failed to avoid the appearance of partiality because of a series of media interviews and public statements that she made responding to the criticism of the court. Now, for more on this, not just the legality, but also the politics, and as you know, we are in election season here. We are joined by Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist and author. He's been covering this case since the get-go, been in Lower Manhattan more than a few times at the courthouse. We're also joined by James Kasouras, criminal defense attorney who specialized in criminal defense litigation for more than 20 years now. Prior to turning to criminal defense, James served as assistant DA in the Bronx. Gentlemen, thank you. James, if you can, let's start out with legality, and Dom, we'll get to the political consequences. Explain what the court said today and why it said that Judge Scheindlin shouldn't be on the bench here for the next step.
Well, first, what were we doing before the Second Circuit? The Second Circuit basically said two things. The city applied for a stay, simply saying that the ruling and the implementation of the corrective action that Judge Scheindlin ordered should be stayed. Hold off until we perfect our appeal, because we believe the ruling was wrong. We believe we'll win the appeal, and therefore, why should we implement such draconian changes in police policy until then? The court said that the court issued that stay and said that pending the appeals, and they gave a scheduling order for the appeals, pending the resolution of the appeal, these measures that were ordered will be stayed. But interestingly, the court also removed Judge Scheindlin from the case, having found that she violated certain rules of judicial conduct in issuing these interviews and making public statements about the case. But it's important to note that they specifically stated that in so doing, they were not addressing the merits of the appeal. They were not addressing the decision and how they would be ruling on the appeal.
Now, from a practical standpoint, the policy of stop and frisk, what does that mean? Forgetting what happens next Tuesday in the election and then January and the new mayor comes in, can the NYPD practice the policy of stop and frisk like it did before without consequence?
Well, they can, but I think practically speaking, they have to be very careful about the way they do things. Look, there was a long trial, and there was a lot of evidence adduced at this trial, and there was certainly testimony about policies that I think everybody would agree need to be amended. So they can certainly continue the policy of stop and frisk. How they do so is a question of their own policy and their own internal review of the evidence that came out and the way they should implement any such practice. But certainly the court did not bar them from continuing because the order has been stayed.
Dominic, this issue obviously front and center during the whole campaign. A lot of people think the reason de Blasio emerged out of the pack the way he did, seemingly out of nowhere, was he was the first one to say, if I'm mayor here, I'm not changing the policy on the edges here, I'm changing the policy altogether. Is this just delaying, in effect, the inevitable? I understand this was a legal decision, not on the merits of the case, but really on the person behind the bench, the person in the robe here. This is just possibly just going to push this down the road a little bit, but this is a policy that's probably nearing the end.
Maybe, maybe not. The appellate court, whoever listens to this case and an accurate reading from counsel here of exactly what went on. Having sat in that courtroom day in, day out, the 15th floor of the judge's courtroom, it's clear that the city wanted her off of this case because she pulled no punches where she was coming from.
Okay, but you and I both know you're going to have a different mayor and you're going to have a different police commissioner, okay? And those were the two people who fought tooth and nail to keep this policy, defended this policy. It's a huge part of both their legacies. Whatever two people come in, they read the polls, they see how the public's going to be voting next Tuesday. This policy, either they're not going to keep the name, they're not going to keep much of it. It's pretty much on its last legs, right?
Maybe. Remember, this mayor and police commissioner have said emphatically that they have done nothing wrong, that they believe that it's good policing. Now, as you point out, all the Democrats that were running for mayor, this was perhaps the top issue in the Democratic primary.
And the front runners kicking themselves, as you know, because de Blasio got ahead of them.
And I just want to read for you, Richard, because we do have, as of seconds ago, a statement from the Democratic nominee for mayor, Bill de Blasio. And this reads, he just issued this statement this evening in which he says, "I'm extremely disappointed in today's decision. We shouldn't have to wait for reforms that both keep our communities safe and obey the Constitution. We have to end the overuse of stop and frisk," going to what you just said, "and any delay only means a continued and unnecessary rift between our police and the people they protect."
Okay. How does this work from a timeline standpoint? They say, okay, time out, we're going to put a stay on this thing. Obviously going to get another judge to hear this. Practically speaking, how long is this thing probably going to take?
You're not going to get another judge to hear this. The Second Circuit is going to hear this, and it's an interesting thing. By removing Judge Shinlin, they're removing Judge Shinlin from the case, but anything that Judge Shinlin would do, given the stay, is going to come months down the road. So in terms of your timeline, I think the order was briefs need to be submitted. I think it'll be fully briefed by February of 2014. I think that the Second Circuit is going to move with alacrity. I think they will get it done quickly. I think you'll have a decision by June, and that's where you are. But if you just look at that quote, the overuse of stop and frisk. I'm not so sure that the incoming administration, they may call it something else, but they're not going to put an end to policing. They're not going to put an end to what the Constitution permits. And I mean, to a certain extent,
you put on your two hats, both back when you were an ADA, and then obviously as a defense attorney now. The part that we always talked about was forget about Republican, Democrat, everything else. If you're a black guy, far more likely you were going to say spread them than if you were a white guy. Depending on your zip code, you're going to get different treatment than somebody else, certainly on Park Ave. It just seemed on the face, the math didn't add up. It wasn't the best of policies here. We understand why you want to have it at your discretion as a tool if you're the cops, but it was obviously overused and abused. From your background here, is there really a way to be half pregnant with this thing and give basically this amount of discretion to the cops without it getting basically to be an abusive tool?
The amount of discretion that the New York Court of Appeals and Supreme Court of the United States have given law enforcement is perfectly acceptable. It really is. And it is the overuse. It is when it's used in particular against certain minorities or certain classes in certain places.
One question though, James.
Go ahead.
Furtive movement, okay? I've heard this thing, I've read these things. Furtive movement, it can mean anything. You look at the guy, he doesn't look right to you. You say, okay, you made a furtive movement. Open your pockets, go through everything else. To me, that's where this problem happens, where it's this open-ended discretion here. Somebody's just going to their apartment and they're stopped when you and I wouldn't get stopped. I just don't see how that amount of discretion can ever be managed. Even if the majority of them have good intentions, it's going to go wrong someplace.
But I think that what the ruling and what the practice, what was brought out about it was an exercise of discretion that was very overbroad and it was abused. You can't define furtive movement as just anything. And the New York Court of Appeals has handed decision after decision after decision. Look, don't get me wrong. I'm a defense attorney for over 20 years. Stop and frisk is something that has troubled us. You know, we had the problems with anti-crime several years ago. This abuse of power is something that has troubled us, and the imprimatur given to it by judge after judge after judge that doesn't want to call an officer a liar or not entirely credible has been something that's troubled us for a long time. And periodically you have these scandals with these precincts where all of a sudden it comes out that this is what's going on, that there are people who are getting rolled.
All the other problems.
It happens, and our judicial system should be able to prevent it.
And I just want to point out, as far as the furtive movement, there's a change now. Remember, during the trial, the department trying to put forth the public relations move changed the policy where the chief of department issued a new memo in the middle of the trial where they can no longer just check furtive movement on the box when they do a stop and frisk. They've now got to give more of a definitive reason, the officer, for why they've made that stop.
Well, like in so many things, Dominic, as you know, politics and policy, they go hand in hand with these things. It depends who's going to be the next person in charge of Police Plaza. It's going to be the next person in Gracie Mansion.
This is a monkey wrench, though, because with the judge removed, if it goes back to the lower court and then you've removed her from the case, what's going to happen?
Well, what's going to happen, though, depends on what the Second Circuit says. If the Second Circuit upholds the merits of the ruling and upholds the sanctions or modifies them only to a certain extent, quite frankly, the next judge is going to implement them.
The message that they've got a problem with. It could change, but so far it's just a messenger. Okay, and gents, we're going to be bringing you back in a little bit. We're going to be talking about the Michael Skakel case, which to me is fascinating. We've covered that for so long here, and I got a whole host of questions for you on that. When we come back, though, we will switch gears, talk a little bit about politics, but when we return, we're going to be focusing on Long Island, specifically Nassau County, the executive race. It's a tough rematch, fascinating. When we come back, we'll be joined by a person who once held the job, who wants his job back here, Mr. Swazi. We'll be talking to him one-on-one right after this.